Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Parker Radio Association December edition, Elmer Night. You know, if you think back before COVID, pre-COVID, we would all be gathering in a room down at the library in Parker, and we'd have a few people coming in the door right now, and we'd have everybody gathering and sitting down and talking about the presentation, and if there was one for Elmer Night, we would be looking at everybody's toys that they brought with them, and we'd be looking at what everyone has in their hand and what they're talking on, and Elmer Night was just always a treat. I remember one of our club members back in probably 2018 said, you know, I really like Elmer Night better than I do the regular face-to-face meeting. And so for Terry and I, who started this, that was a compliment. We were really happy to hear that. But welcome tonight. We're glad you're here on Google Meets and on YouTube Live. And we have a fantastic presentation for you tonight. My name is Paul, AC5S, and in just a minute, I'm going to introduce you to Terry. And Terry and I are doing the presentation tonight. We are going to go about an hour and a half tonight, maybe a little more. But what we really would like, after we get finished with our two short presentations, is to field questions that you have tonight. Everyone that's on the Google Meet side, anyway, certainly can chime in and ask questions directly. And if you're on the YouTube side, you can go into the chat portion and send questions in, and those will be fielded, and we'll answer those as well. So tonight is all about asking questions and hopefully getting answers. Once we get done with all the questions and answers about the topic tonight, which is kit building, and this is kit building 2.0 or number 2 or phase 2 or night number 2, whatever you want to call it, because we did a fantastic get together here about 3 or 4 weeks ago with Brad, AB4BA, who did kit building number 1. And so if you remember that, it was really good, and we all went out and started buying stuff. It cost us some money. But tonight, I don't know whether it'll cost us money or not, but I will tell you that we are going to do kit building number 2. And Terry is going to start out, and I'll finish it up. We are also looking for topics for Elmer Night and our Elmer Nets on Thursday nights. And several people have sent me suggestions, and thank you very, very much. And they can go to me, they can go to Terry, they can just go to parkerradio.org, and we'll get those suggestions. And from those suggestions, we've already got several things lined up in 2021 based on the input from all the club members. So whether you've been with us for 6+ years, starting our 7th year, actually on Friday, whether you've been with us for that entire time or whether you joined yesterday or the last month or the month before, we're really glad you're here tonight. And I do want to just shout out just briefly to all the new members that have joined here in the last 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months. It's been a fantastic opportunity, I think, for people to have more time at home, maybe on their computer, and getting to play a little more with hobbies. And we've had a lot of people join the club, and we're very anxious to meet you in person. And hopefully in the next year, in 2021, we'll be back to our face-to-face meetings. And I think we're all looking forward to that. So before I turn it over to Terry, I just want to real briefly throw it over to the president of the club and to SRK. And Dan, do you have any words of wisdom for us before I get this presentation going?
Hey, Paul, thanks for the update. Boy, what an exciting year it's been for the PRA. If you go outside the walls of the PRA, and you know everything that's either in the newspaper, the media, you would think that there was something major going on globally. But within the walls of the PRA, we've just had just a tremendous snowball effect of success within the organization in 2020. Not only our membership growth, but it's been meetings like this. It's been our monthly meetings, but as Paul said, in particular, the Elmer Night has just been a highlight of this year. Not only the presentations have been top notch, I haven't walked away from one where I go, well, I already knew that. I've walked away learning something out of every one of these meetings. And I think that's just a testament to the presenters, I think it's a testament to the passion that each member of the organization has back to the amateur radio service. And boy, oh boy, it's been a great 2020 for the PRA. And if we can just continue to build the momentum from this going into 2021, I'm expecting an avalanche of success for us. So, I again, as Paul mentioned, I want to thank the new members that have joined us over the last year. It's been your participation, your impact, and your support of the PRA that have certainly helped us. I want to thank the committee members, the committee chairs that have participated, from repeater committees to the PRA actionware, VE committees, community outreach. The list goes on and on. New member committees. I mean, HRO committee. It's amazing to see the amount of participation that every club member has had. And I'll also use this opportunity as a plug. If you are a PRA member, we'd love to have you take at least just one net a year. It'll help us out tremendously. Again, it's easy to sign up, www.parkerradio.org under the events tab. A couple mouse clicks that quick and you'll get yourself signed up. So that's about it from this end. We'll send it back to you, Paul, and appreciate you taking it. Back to Net from M2FRK.
Hey, Dan, thank you very much for the word for those words from our leadership. And I will just reiterate what Dan said. We really need net control operators. I got an email the other day from one of our members and said, I really would like to write my own script. And I said, absolutely. You can write your own script. You can do the net any way you want to do the net. He said he used to live back on the East Coast, and they did the net a little differently with the different script and that type of thing. So there is no right or wrong way, so to speak. I mean, you can do whatever you want. So certainly write your own script and jump in. And if you need some help, we're happy to help you. We'll talk with you about it on the phone ahead of time, or do a Zoom meeting or whatever, or maybe meet in person here at some point in the future. Okay. Well, let me turn it over to Terry, WB3EVZ. Terry is one of our founding members of the club, and Terry has been involved in amateur radio for many, many, many years. You probably know him for a lot of different reasons, but he's a guy that runs CW Mobile. I think everybody remembers Terry for that, and he had a job where he could do that quite a bit here until recently. So Terry's our CW Mobile guy, but he's also chairman of the Elmer Night committee, and so he's built a lot of kits and has a lot of words of wisdom. So Terry, WB3EVZ, over to you.
All righty, Paul. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome, new members, old members, guests. Like Paul, lots of new names, lots of new voices, lots of new call letters on the repeater. I can't wait till we can get back into person, or get back together in person, face to face, to meet one another. And appreciate everybody's patience and tolerance as we do these virtual meetings. A lot of this Elmer stuff started out as a great face to face, it worked better face to face. We could get together, we could sit down, we could break off into groups and discuss certain topics. Obviously, we can't do that, so we're trying to do the best that we can. And again, like Paul said, we're always open to topics. If you have any suggestions, you can reach out to us at our call sign at parkerradio.org. You can use the contact us link via the website. That'll get to the board and that'll get off to us. So let me see if I can do that. I'm going to do that. Let me hang on here. Sometimes I'm a little technically challenged. So I click on that and we'll go here. And there we are. So what we're going to do tonight, a few weeks ago at the beginning of the month, hopefully everybody can see my screen.
Yep, looking good.
Okay, good. At the beginning of the month, Brad, AB4BA, presented a little talk on kit building on just the Elmer net, on the voice net, on the W0CFI repeater. We just wanted to take that topic and go a little bit more in depth into it and build on that a little bit. Keep track of your questions. You can submit them via the chat feature in YouTube Live. or you can get to us from Google Meets. And I'll go through my presentation, which isn't very long. Then we'll turn it over to Paul, and then afterwards we'll get into the questions and hopefully have some good discussions. I'm going to focus more on traditional analog gear, analog kits, and Paul's going to follow up with more of the digital side of things, Arduinos, Raspberry Pis, BeagleBone Blacks, that sort of thing. So a little bit of history, home brewing, and I'm not talking about beer, Jeff, was a great way for new or frugal hams, to build equipment and get back on the air. For some of the newer folks out there, hopefully you're all ARRL members. The American Radio Relay League's magazine, QST, has been running a column recently called A Look Back, and they published some older columns, older articles from QST. And a lot of those are kits, not kits, but projects, things to build, amplifiers, receivers. It's kind of great to get a little insight into what we had to deal with back in the day when we got our license. And a funny story, and I don't think Dan was a part of this story, even though he might have lived in New Jersey at the time. I got my license back in 1976 when I was still in junior high. I remember a trash day very early in the morning. I repurposed a television that was in the trash heap in front of one of the neighbors' house in Pittsburgh, where I grew up, where my WB3 EVZ call is from. And pieced it out, took all the components out of transformers, tubes, tube sockets, resistors, capacitors, coils. And I found an article, talked about a little one-tube transmitter. The tube had two components, had a pentode and a triode into one envelope. So half of that tube acted as a little oscillator that would work with a quartz crystal for the frequency of the transmitter. And then the second part of the tube, the triode, was the amplifier. Put out probably 5 or 6 watts. It wasn't terribly efficient. But when I got everything put together with an old Radio Shack receiver, I made a contact with a station in New Jersey. Not really DX, just 300 miles away. But to me, it was pretty amazing that other than the chassis, some switches and the crystal and a meter and the chassis to hold everything together, these pieces and parts came out of a television set. I was able to make it into a transmitter that actually really worked. Actually took first place in the science fair that year with it too, which was pretty exciting for a junior high kid. But nowadays, as I'm sure all of you are aware, components are harder to find. Discrete components to build things with or repair things, or if you can find them, they're more expensive than they used to be. You might find a 50-cent transistor to fix something, but it's going to cost you $7.95 to get the thing shipped to you. So that's a challenge that we have to deal with these days that we didn't so much in the past. You could run down to your local television repair shop when we used to fix appliances instead of throw them out. And get the pieces and parts you needed. And fortunately for me in McKeesport in southwestern Pennsylvania, where I grew up, there was a ham that owned the local television shop. So he helped me out as a poor kid as much as he could, giving me breaks on parts and pieces that I needed to buy there. So I think the key thing with building kits is just the opportunity to learn. No matter where you're at in your amateur radio career, I mean, there's some opportunity to figure something out from building a kit. Whether you're new and you're still not really sure what the difference is between a resistor and a capacitor and an inductor and a transistor and a transformer, kits will help you sort that stuff out. They go into explaining, what are these colored bands on the resistors mean? How do I tell what the value of that resistor is? How do I tell you what the tolerance is? Is it within 5% of its value or 10% or 20%? The same with capacitors and what are all the numbers on diodes and transistors and what do they mean? Some of the kits, and Heathkit is really the creme de la creme in my experience. Unfortunately, they're not really around anymore. Someone did buy the name and the company exists again. But I was just working, a little side note here, is I've been working on an old HW16 transceiver. It was a mid-70s vintage tube transceiver that Heathkit built, or Heathkit made the kit, and you built it. Was really geared at novices at the time. At the time, novices were only allowed had privileges to operate on 4 of our high-frequency bands, only CW, only Morse code, back in the day when you needed to know Morse code to get your license. Novices could only run a transmitter with 75 watt input. Everybody these days is talking about the output. If you have a 100 watt rig, it puts out 100 watts. Probably 75 watts input into that final amplifier of an HW16 would maybe put out 50 watts, maybe just a little bit more. But you could run no more than 75 watts input to your final amplifier, and you had to run crystal controlled. Most people didn't have a whole lot of money for crystals, so you'd call CQ and you'd listen around quite a bit with the receiver, because you could only transmit on one frequency, but you could listen everywhere. Nowadays, everybody expects you to answer exactly where you call, and sometimes that's a good thing and sometimes not so much. But it was a pretty cool rig. I got it on the air and it's together, and we'll hook it up to the antenna here for straight key night starting New Year's Eve tomorrow night, and got the dust blown off the old straight key and see if we can't talk to somebody on a rig that I started my ham radio career with a long, long time ago. So building kits, I think again, back to the Heathkit example, the manuals had amazing circuit descriptions and theories of operation. So like you can get this HW16 built. I mean, there were pictures, and it told you to get a 100 ohm resistor, and it would tell you that the color codes for that were black, brown, brown. Once you got all of that done, the circuit description would explain, how the crystal oscillator worked, how the driver worked, how the final amplifier worked, how the receiver worked, and the beat frequency oscillator, all of these technical things that you may or may not know. So it's a great opportunity to understand what's going on inside the box that you have in front of you. Obviously, you're going to need to practice soldering skills, and you may get to learn some unsoldering skills as well. And if things don't go quite right, you get to learn and practice troubleshooting skills. Again, the better documented kits will have troubleshooting charts, will have circuit descriptions to help you out along that way. Some of the kits come with manuals with them. Others you need to download online. Some are better, some are worse. So investigate things before you really get into it and go ahead and purchase things. So what can you build? I mean, pretty much anything that's in your shack. Transmitters, receivers, or transceivers, obviously, which is a transmitter and a receiver in one box. The QRP kits, QRP is a Q code that we use as an abbreviation on CW, means you're running a transmitted power of 5 watts or less. They're less expensive, they're simpler, they're usually a little easier to build, but you can build 100-watt radios as well. You can build amplifiers that run much more than that as well. But getting into these analog equipment, again, with that circuit description, with the schematic, blow off the dust from the things you studied for your license, you can learn about oscillators and mixers, amplifiers, power supplies, how we get that signal into the antenna, filters that are in the radio. Just lots and lots and lots of stuff. The better kits will answer some of those questions for you. Or you can dig into the ARRL handbook to look up some of that stuff, or get online and search some of these things that you read about and that you're putting together, but you just don't understand. There's antenna kits available, antenna tuners and balance. Balance are balanced to unbalanced transformers to go from unbalanced coax to maybe a balanced antenna like a dipole. Building these things provide insight into how traps work. A lot of you guys I know run Hustler BTV verticals, or maybe you're fortunate enough to have a trapped Yagi, a beam up on a tower. What's inside those traps? How does that coil, that inductor and that capacitor and that trap work? Why does it do what it does? Kits give you a little bit more in-depth understanding as to what's going on about that. The same with impedances with these balance and antenna tuners. We've got this antenna, we've got our radio. Our radio was built to work into a 50 ohm load. How do we make everything work together happily? I know a lot of you guys run random end-fed wire antennas, or just even resonant end-fed wire antennas. Most of those antennas don't have 50 ohm impedances. Random wire antennas work really well with these 9-to-1 impedance ratio balance. Some use different ratios, but to understand how all of that interacts with one another, kits, you build these coils and you build these transformers, then you can learn a little bit about why they do what they do. There's kits out there to build test equipment to allow you to build more equipment, or maybe just improve your shack and your operating situation. There's power meters that you can build. There's SWR indicators and bridges. There's dummy loads to test your transmitters with. One really cool one that's really inexpensive from QRP kits, which I'll get into here in another couple slides, is some little power monitoring circuits, just some LEDs. The board has a green and a red and a yellow LED. You can set those limits for what's over voltage, what's under voltage, and what's just right. You can build it into your Go box to keep an eye on your batteries, what's going on with them. Even with power supplies at home, if you're having problems with your power supply, you can have signal generators to test receivers with. Antenna analyzers to check your analyzers with. There's old analog circuitry ones. There's also some new VNAs, vector network analyzers, which are geared more towards the digital side of things, the Raspberry Pis. Lots of those floating around for cheap, $50, $60 for some of the more inexpensive ones, maybe a couple $100 for some of the more expensive ones, but just really practical stuff that really makes work in the shack a whole lot easier. You can build power supplies, frequency counters. If you have some old analog radios like this HW16 with just a rotary dial that's marked, 0, 5, 10, up to 150. If you want a little bit better accuracy, you can build a digital frequency display and interface that with your old style tube radio as well. Some of these simpler kits that I've been talking about, $15, $20, you get these kits. They don't come with any enclosures. So you can build them into a piece of equipment that you want to modify. A lot of these small QRP transmitters are nicknamed tuna tins because guys used to build them and put them in an old tuna can. You can get as creative as you want there. And again, the instructions for the kits, some are provided with the kits, some you need to download. Some are good, some are not so good, some are in between. So look into it or ask some questions and talk around before you spend your money. There's also no solder kits available. Sometimes it's just circuit boards and controls and cases, and you just need to screw the thing together. But again, you learn, it's like, well, what does this board do and what does that board do and why am I plugging them together? And, is this a potentiometer on the front panel or a capacitor? What's going on? There's also opportunities to learn there if you don't want to get into the soldering side of things. And as we're talking about soldering, some of the kits use the more modern surface mount devices as opposed to traditional through-hole components. A circuit board that had a hole in it, and the resistors leads go through the hole in the board. You solder them in place, you're good to go. Manufacturers like surface mount devices. They're smaller. You can get more stuff on a circuit board, and they work really well in an automated production facility. Doing it by yourself can be a little bit challenging, but it is doable. But a lot of companies, MFJ makes some kits, some small transceivers, that they mount the surface mount devices for you, and you just put together the in-hole, through-hole components. You mount everything in the chassis, solder up all the controls, the jacks for antennas, headphones, and whatnot. So again, look into what you're buying before you get into it. Surface mount stuff can be a little bit frustrating if you've never done it before. I used to have to do it professionally, and I was paid to do it, but it's pretty much a pain in the butt if you don't have the right equipment to do it at home. But you can buy kits that work is already done for you. So here's just a couple of things that are sitting in the shack, either built or waiting to be built someday. And the top of the screen, there are two dummy loads. That 100-watt load is a real simple kit, easy to start with. It is a whole bunch of resistors soldered into a circuit board, and there's an antenna connector, a UHF connector, an SO239 on the back to hook to your transmitter. It came from Oak Hills Research, and Oak Hills Research is run by Morse Express, which is a local company, but the owner, N1FN, is in the process of retiring, so it's kind of hit and miss what he has in stock, but there's other ones on the market. It was just about $50. Can take 100 watts all day long. If you're working on a transmitter, you don't want to be dumping a signal onto the air. This 100-watt load will absorb that power. To the right, it's a little fuzzy in my picture, and I apologize, I'm no mic. It's just a 5-watt dummy load. It's for sale from the Colorado QRP Club. You can find them online. Comes with all the connectors you need. It has adapters for UHF connectors. It'll have a PL259 to plug into your rig, or it has a BNC connector. A lot of the QRP rigs use the smaller BNC connector, like you'll see on the antenna tuner below, those bayonet type connectors. You solder two resistors together and you screw a connector together and you're done. It's a simple kit, lets you practice your soldering skill. You can't really ruin a resistor or a connector, you'd really have to try. But if you've never soldered before, it's a good place to begin. Over on the right are things from qrpkits.com, the website specific antenna, and I'll get into the links more here in a little bit as well. But both websites work. Really handy things. The top in that bag on the top left for $15 was that battery status indicator I was talking about. Teeny little circuit board, 3 LEDs, and a push button. You push the button to preset where your average, your high, and your over voltage and under voltage settings are. You can build it into your Go box, build it into your battery box, build it into a standalone box. To the right is a digital dial, which is really just a small frequency counter. Works good with these old analog radios or even the new solid state analog radios that maybe don't have, a calibrated digital frequency dial like we're all used to looking to on our main shack radios. That easy SWR indicator, built again for QRP, so it uses those BNC, the bayonet connectors, but it just has an LED. When you're tuning an antenna and you get that standing wave ratio, you get that 50 ohm to 50 ohm match, the LED glows dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. If you get it right, the LED will glow out. No batteries, no fuss, no muss. It's a great field and portable ops piece of equipment to have with you. That antenna dipper at the bottom is a little bit more involved kit, a little bit more expensive, $60. Again, it comes with no case. You download the manual from the website. It actually has a frequency display and works a little bit more like an antenna analyzer. It lets you adjust the frequency to find out where the antenna is resonant. If it's a dipole, is it resonant too low in frequency? Well, the antenna's too long. Is it resonant too high in frequency? Well, it's too short. You can make a better educated guess to tune your antennas. It's a little more useful piece of equipment. And then on the right is a dipole that they sell. It's a $25 kit. It's good for, I think they say 200 watts. I kind of wonder about that, but certainly it takes 100 watts without any problems. It's good on 20 and 40 meters. The coil arrangements on the right are traps. So you have to wind that coil. You wind the wire around the plastic coil form. And on the circuit boards, underneath are a couple of capacitors. Those capacitors and coils are resonant around the 20 meter band or 14 megahertz band. So what they do, if you can, hopefully you can all picture a dipole antenna like the old twin lead dipoles we had with our stereo receivers. The coax would connect to that BNC connector on the little green circuit board. And then the dipole extends out like a T. Half would go to the left and half would go to the right. Well, in the middle of that T on each leg is one of these traps. Well, when the traps are resonant at 14 megahertz, it's like an electric switch. It presents a really high resistance, technically a high impedance, and it only sees the inside of that T, and the antenna is resonant on 20 meters. And you can basically work the whole band. You can work the CW portion at the low end, go up to 14,350, the high end of the sideband edge of the band, and it works just fine. When you get on to 40 meters on 7 megahertz, the trap is no longer resonant. That coil and the capacitors inside of it aren't resonant. Electrically, it's like it doesn't even exist. Your transmitter sees the whole length of the antenna, and it works on 40 meters with no problems. The only caveat, because it's a little shorter, because of those traps that are in there physically shorter, is you may need to adjust the antenna if you want to run phone, if you're going to run sideband at the upper end of the band. If you want to run CW, then you can change the length to work at the lower end of the band from like 7 megahertz up to 7.05, maybe 7.1. And that's why if you see, kind of use your imagination right in the middle of that right picture, there's just some heat shrink, is I don't ever solder the ends of my antennas. If I need, I just kind of unwrap that heat, pull that wire out of the heat shrink, unwrap it. You can make it longer, you can make it shorter. Just fold the wire back on itself if you need to tune it. That's where that easy SWR indicator can come into play, or the antenna dipper. If you don't want to go to the trouble of the dipole, if you go to the very bottom, that MTech ZM2 tuner was a really fun kit to build. They're a little under $65. You can get them with UHF, the standard PL259, SO239 connectors that we're used to seeing. Or since I use mine with the QRP radios, I ordered it with the BNC connectors. But this tuner will basically tune any antenna that you can come up with. You can tune a coax fed antenna. you can flip that. It says link, the switch on the right. You can see the ground, but you can't see above it. Is you can also feed balanced antennas. You can feed verticals, random length antennas. Basically, anything you can connect to this tuner, it'll tune. May work a little better. Some may work better than others, but it'll work with everything. And it has a circuit similar to that SWR indicator from QRP kits built in. On the left side, you'll see that tune and operate switch. If you flip it to tune, you put some power into the tuner, you've got your antenna connected up. That's a red LED. It's just got a clear lens on it. It'll glow. As you adjust those two knobs, the two capacitors, the knob, as you get closer and closer to resonance, that 50 ohm impedance that our radios are designed to work with, that light will just get dimmer and dimmer and dimmer and eventually glow out. It's cool. No batteries, no fuss, no muss. It's maybe about 3 inches high and 5 inches long. It's not as convenient as some of the as the electronic tuners, but you don't need to worry about batteries. It's smaller, it's lighter. I really like to backpack with it. Then if you're used to using the same types of antennas, those knobs on the capacitors are graduated from 0 to 12. You can see the little marks there on the dial. Is you can just make a note, hey, on 40 meters with this length of random wire antenna is maybe I have, a 6 on the left dial and a 10 on the right dial. That'll get you in the ballpark, and then you just fine tune it, because antennas, I'm sure most of us have discovered, can be picky with their surroundings. How high are they above ground? Or they run into trees or through trees? Or is all of it in the air? Is it all horizontal? Is it half vertical, half horizontal? But if you make notes of those settings, it'll get you really close really fast. And it's fun to build. You get to solder things onto circuit boards. You get to build some transformers, wind some coils, and physically, mechanically put everything together in there. So tools and test equipment. And we'll visit Brad's notes here in a little bit. This digital multimeter is invaluable. I mean, everybody should have one. I mean, you can get them for as cheap as $10. I would recommend getting something a little better than that, but you need to see what it is that you need to do with it. But I mean, even the $10 tool is good for checking voltages. Hey, is my battery dead? Is it good? Is my power supply at home putting out 13.8 volts or not? A cheap $10 or $15 meter will do that. Professionally, I've always used Fluke test equipment, and it's probably like the Motorola's in the radio world. I mean, the stuff is as good as it's cracked up to be. It's pretty much indestructible, but it can be crazy expensive. As a ham, you probably don't need that physical robustness. You probably don't need the accuracy of some of their meters. I'll show a picture of what I use here at home, and even though I've used the Flukes for 40 some years of being in electronics field service, the BK precision meter that I have works just fine at home. And it was, I think, about $85. So you need to really balance what you need. And then you can go shopping around. And again, you can ask us in the club, what do we use, maybe what we recommend. But you don't need to necessarily go with the best. But even the cheap one, just to say, hey, is this piece of coax open or shorted? Is my battery dead or not? I mean, you've got to have at least the $10 or $15 meter in your shack. I mean, that's just, you should have to say that you have one before you get your license. I mean, the things are that indispensable. As you start to look at fancier test equipment, oscilloscopes, spectrum analyzers, frequency counters, and the like, they take a bit more technical know-how to know what they do, why they do it. Maybe you need it, maybe you don't. Most of the kits that I built lately is you just need a good digital multimeter that can measure voltage and current and resistance. And this fancier bits of test equipment can be more expensive. There are some cheaper versions. I know with the Pi's and some of the digital kits, you can actually build like an interface and run software and turn your computer into an oscilloscope, which if you're working in the bench might be good. If you're out in the field, maybe not so much. But there are options, and things can be a little bit cheaper. You don't have to spend a whole lot of money. When it comes to hand tools to put these kits together, I'm sure that most of you folks have the stuff on hand already. Some of the things for kits may just be a little bit smaller. Some of the alignment tools, nibblers, if you're going to start, working with aluminum chassis or cases and trying to cut holes that you can't just drill, maybe a square hole you need to mount a meter or something in, you can buy as you need them. And I've got some pictures of that stuff coming up. And like anything else in life, you're never going to regret anything. I mean, if you buy something, spend a little bit more, get something that's decent quality, and you're going to be a whole lot happier with it. Trying to buy some cheap tools and, you have needle nose that don't touch, the jaws don't touch one another. You can't pick things up, or, dikes that turn into wire strippers because you cut a piece of copper that was a little too thick and you notched the blade. And yeah, just spend a little bit more and you're going to be a whole lot happier. And good lighting. And as I get older, I appreciate magnification. Have a magnifying glass on the light that I use on my workbench is really, really helpful. And Brad, as we'll see here, has some ideas and some options online where you can find that stuff. And the digital multimeters are kind of goof proof. If you get the wrong voltage setting, you're usually not going to ruin them. They're smart enough to protect themselves and somehow let you know that you're over voltage. It'll say, hey, you're on the wrong scale, you need to change it. Or they have auto ranging features and they take care of themselves. So to jump back a little bit from the test equipment to the tools, there's some Weller equipment there that you can see. There's a teeny little 12-watt soldering pencil and then a 35-watt iron that I use for everything. The soldering gun is pretty handy, not so much for building kits, but it's really great for working on antennas, especially outside. So when you do buy tools, make sure that you get, what's appropriate to what you need. At the bottom is an inexpensive third-hand tool that was gifted to me by a good friend. Everything's adjustable. The magnifying glass, the alligator clips. There's a little coil there you can stick your soldering iron in so you don't catch things on fire. To hold components, to hold wires, to hold circuit boards. They're invaluable. There's lots and lots of options online for things like that. And the center there at the bottom is some of the desoldering tools for when things go wrong or you just need to repair something. There's two different vacuum operated solder suckers. Solder Pullet is the one in the middle, but there's many different brands. They work really well. And it's hard to see in the picture, not a lot of resolution there, but that solder wick just looks like braid, like the braid in coax. And actually with that, you heat up the solder joint with your soldering iron, you place the wick on it, and it sucks the solder away from the joint. Is really helpful to get old solder out of the way before you go ahead and do a repair. Or just get the wrong component out of the circuit board and put the right one in. On the right are just some of the tools, you may not normally have. The lighter green needle nose at the bottom. I mean, they're just short. You can see they're only about 4 inches long. Not always useful for around the house stuff, but pretty handy when it comes to building kits. At the top, those little nippers or cutters are actually flush cutting cutters. The jaws are kind of shaped like a chisel instead of a dike where both sides of the jaws are angled in. This has one side of that blade, one side of the jaw that's flat and the other side that's angled. So if you trim a lead on the bottom of a circuit board, when you're done, there's no jagged edge sticking out. So they're really, really handy. Different sizes, different qualities. Just be careful that you don't use a lightweight tool on a heavyweight piece of wire. You turn them into a pair of wire strippers. As you get into some of the kits, especially the more radio-oriented kits, receivers or transmitters, is you'll need some of these adjustment tools. They're made out of plastic or nylon so they don't affect the radio frequency of the circuits you're trying to adjust. But again, a special little tool that you probably don't have, but find out if the kit you're building needs it. Some of the kits, Heathkit used to provide these. A lot of the newer kits, because they are less expensive, you need to provide those yourselves. So these are a couple of meters. On the left is the digital, that B&K Precision 2709B, 2709 Bravo, is what I have at home. It was less than $85. Not as robust as the Flukes that I've used throughout my career. Not quite as accurate, but for anything I've done in the shack, it's more than accurate enough. You can measure AC voltage, you can measure DC voltage, alternating current or direct current. You can measure resistance there with a little omega symbol. It's supposed to be a dot and a few lines. That's the continuity tester. If you're trying to test a cable or test a fuse, hey, is this fuse open or not, and you can't look at the meter, it beeps when there's continuity, which is really handy. That diode tester, once you know and understand a little bit more about transistors, you can test bipolar transistors, you can test diodes with that. This meter will also, it's hard to see there, that next step up on the dial at about 11 o'clock is a capacitor, it'll measure capacitance. If you have an unknown capacitor or you don't understand the markings on it and try to figure out the value, it's really handy. And the top there at the dial is hertz. It's actually a frequency counter. I can't remember what the range is. It's not really up into RF, but at least audio frequencies. If there's some basic frequencies you might need to measure, this meter might come in handy. And as you go over to the right, it starts to measure current, microamps, milliamps, all the way up to 10 amps, both direct current amperage and AC current, alternating current amperage. It's backlit. It'll remember minimums and maximums. If you can't look at the meter, you can get it on a circuit, do what you need to do, then come back to the meter. It'll say this was the highest reading I read. This was the lowest measurement that I had. One advantage of the analog meters, that's an old one on the right, and that was actually available as a kit from Radio Shack once upon a time, is if you're trying to peak a circuit, you build a kit and it's like adjust this potentiometer for the maximum voltage. The digital meters can be frustrating because you're watching numbers count up or count down. If anybody's been lucky enough to be in a modern airplane with a glass panel, they still replicate, even though it's all digital, they replicate analog gauges because it's a whole lot easier to see, is this meter moving up or down, or is this number counting up or down? Pilots are old school and like the convenience of that. There are digital multimeters that have like a bar graph at the bottom that simulate the meter moving up and down. This particular model didn't have it, and I didn't really want to spend the extra money at the time because I've got some of these older meters around. On the right, that's technically called a VOM, a volt ohm meter, which is similar but not exactly the same as a VTVM, a vacuum tube voltmeter that you might read about. And this is a little too in-depth for this conversation, but the digital multimeters are probably more similar to the vacuum tube voltmeters. They have a very high impedance. So what that means is if you're trying to measure voltages in a circuit, it's almost like the meter isn't there. If that volt ohm meter on the right, it's actually the circuit voltage that's driving that meter. Actually, it's a meter with magnets and a coil and electromagnets, and that's what's moving that meter, is it can have a loading effect on the circuit and sometimes change the readings that you're trying to look for. So again, if you're building a kit, you need to think about what it is you're trying to measure, and it's even hard to find a mechanical meter anymore. But if you do, you just need to be aware of how it works, and it has its uses and it has places where it shouldn't be used. And also, it's not goof proof. If you dial up on the bottom right there, if you leave it on the 10 volt AC scale in red, it says 10, 50, 250, and 1,000 AC volts. If you put it on 10 and stick it in the wall, you're going to turn that meter into a little fish hook. It's going to slam up to the stop on the right and curl the meter and probably burn out the meter as well. If you accidentally do that with that BK precision, it auto ranges, so it doesn't care. It'll go up to the right scale and show you 110 volts. But even if you run it in the manual mode and select the wrong scale, the meter's not going to blow up on you. It's just going to say, hey, you need to change the scale. So Brad, AB4BA, did this presentation on the Elmer Night at the beginning of the month. You can see that document that he referred to. It's on the website. If you go to forums and then technical and homebrew, you'll see a kit building 101. It's a couple page Word document. Goes more in depth, has a few more links to other kit companies. This next statement, I just picked out Pacific Antennas because I've used a lot of their equipment. They're fun to build. They're inexpensive. So if you really do screw up, you're not out a whole lot of money. There's more link on Brad's sites or Brad's document. Brad's document also points you to some, lights and magnifying kits. Some of the fancy soldering stations where there's actually a sensor and you can control soldering tip temperatures, a little more sophisticated than those irons I use, is he has a few different brands and a few different links to places to go there for some of the tools, some of the test equipment that you might want to buy. Mouser Electronics and DigiKey are two good online sources for discrete components if you need to make a repair or you want to buy something. But like I said earlier, it can get really expensive. You need $2 worth of parts and you're going to pay $10 worth of shipping. And I'll reiterate what Brad said in his talk as well as in that document, is I would avoid the really cheap imported kits. If they work, they're fine. If they don't, it can also be just a path to frustration. If you get a bad part, they forget to put a part in the box. You need to get something fixed. The documentation isn't really in English, so it can be kind of challenging to get things sorted out. So I would recommend sticking with any of the kits that Brad recommends in his document. The companies are usually family-owned. They're smaller companies. They've got great customer support. So that's it. I talked too much. Let me get back here. And I'll turn it over to Paul. Think about your questions. Get them on YouTube Lives on the question and answer there in the chat, or post them here in Google Meets. And I will turn it over to Paul and let him talk a little bit about more of the digital side of things.
Hey, Terry, thanks a lot. And yeah, definitely, we're going to talk just a little bit about digital tonight. And my story is a little different than Terry's story in that I played around with kits when I was in junior high and high school, but I really wasn't all that excited about kit building. I learned how to solder, and I learned how to put together little kits, and they did something. They lit some lights lit up, or a little code oscillator or whatever. But then I kind of put kits aside. Got my license when I was a senior in college, and then I been a ham since 1981, and I haven't didn't touch a kit until maybe about 10 years ago. And I just wasn't interested at all. And the reason I bring that up is because we have hams that listen to this presentation and maybe look at QST magazine, and they notice in QST, for instance, 90% of the magazine has nothing to do with kit building. But usually every month there's one article about building a kit. So that tells me that a lot of amateurs are doing other things besides building kits. But a funny thing happened. We started getting involved. I say we, a lot of people in the Parker Radio Association and myself started getting involved with digital radio. And we started getting involved with D-Star, followed on with DMR and then Fusion. But back in the early days of D-Star, people started buying these things called hotspots. And I was intrigued. I didn't know what a hotspot was. And the first ones were in a plastic enclosure. You couldn't get to the circuit board or anything. And they were called DVAPs. And they pretty much only worked on D-Star and only on what's called the U.S. Trust System. And that's probably that's a topic for another conversation. But as it happened, that was also about the time that a little board came out called a Raspberry Pi. And most of us have never heard about a Raspberry Pi. I mentioned it to my wife one time, and she was like, "Oh, I love Raspberry Pi. So are you going to pick one up?" And I go, "Yeah, I'm going to get one tomorrow," And she was really thinking it was a Pi. She'd never heard of one either. And she's a high school teacher and does some work in technology. So all of a sudden, these Raspberry Pis became available to amateur radio operators, and we started building hotspots. We would take a small transceiver board, plug it onto the Raspberry Pi, and all of a sudden we could use a handheld radio like this to talk to our hotspot, get out on the internet, hit something called a reflector, which nobody knew what that was, and then our digitized voice would come out on the other end somewhere from someone's speaker, just like we're talking tonight. So when Terry was talking about doing this presentation, I thought, Raspberry Pis and another item we're going to talk about in a minute, Arduinos, are also kit building. It's really kit building. Now, it's a little different. You can probably get by without a soldering iron. But what I learned from building my first hotspot, and then my second and my third and my fourth, was that I didn't know anything about programming and Linux, and you need to know a little bit. But the basic things like putting ribbon connectors onto boards and plugging things in and reading instructions and putting it all together. And when I got done, I keyed up the radio and talked to somebody in the UK. So I found my kit building skills in that first project that I built. And after that, I started realizing that Raspberry Pis could be used for many, many things. They're just small computers. And Raspberry Pis went through an evolution process. And 3 or 4 weeks ago, I bought a Raspberry Pi 4 and hooked it up and everything. And it had a GUI. And you had your mouse, and you could go out and get applications that somebody else had already written and download them and click on the mouse, and you could work a hotspot or build a ham clock or do whatever you wanted to. Again, no soldering was involved. You didn't have to worry about what the resistor value was or whether this was a capacitor or an inductor or whatever, but you still put it together. And I started talking to a bunch of hams that said to me, kit building looks like it would be fun, but it's just not what I'm interested in. But I found out they were interested in Raspberry Pis. So I think those of us that started in the back in the day with Raspberry Pis, we were kit builders as well, and we're still kit builders. And then about 6 months ago, one of our club members, AE0GQ, responded to a comment that I had about an Arduino. Now, I had heard that term before, and I remember seeing people on Ham Nation talk about Arduinos. But, I never really saw an Arduino or really knew much about an Arduino. And Tom gave me one, a little Nano. Actually, I have it right here. And I thought that was a really nice gesture. He gave me all this input-output board as well. And this device plugs into the board, and you have basically a controller. So I'm still kit building, just in a little different way. Arduinos are fun little tools, fun little projects. They're controllers, basically. The technical description of them, and I'll just read that to you, is an open source electronics platform based on easy to use hardware and software. Now, for those of us that really fought the Raspberry Pi early on, and we all fought the Raspberry Pi early on, because it wasn't always that simple. You had to do something with Linux. You had to put in a little code. You had to tell the application to do this or do that. And it was far from easy. So when I read this, open source electronics platform based on easy to use hardware and software, it just could have had my name on that. Because that's really what I like. I like buying stuff in the store or on the internet or through a catalog, and I like putting it together and using it. But based on my time and this and that and the other, I don't always have time to build a kit. But I have built a few kits. We'll get to that in a minute. So an Arduino is a fantastic device. You can basically push a button and turn on a light, activate an ultrasonic sensor and turn on a bunch of lights. You can take a tweet. Is that what you call them nowadays, a tweet? And you can publish something on the internet. There's a lot of things you can do with an Arduino, whether they're the smaller nano boards or the bigger boards like Brad was showing us earlier before the net. But you know what? It's still kit building. It's still kit building. I would say that if you think back about my comment about QST, and 95% of the magazine has nothing to do with kit building. Although, before I make this comment, I will say that ARRL, I believe, does have a publication for those people that are interested in kit building, and they have all kinds of books. If you want to solder, you can get all the information you want from the ARRL on that. But 95% of QST and 95% of this magazine, which I subscribe to on the air, has nothing to do with kit building. But there usually is one article in the magazine that has something to do with the kit. That says to me that probably a fairly large number of amateurs don't build kits. Now, maybe they want to, maybe they used to, but they don't build kits on a regular basis. So I would challenge you, maybe taking a position on the other side of the fence for a minute, that if you don't have time to build the kits that Terry showed you, I would still get one and do it just to learn some skill sets with regard to soldering and that type of thing. But if you don't have time to do that, wow, there are lots of other kits available that you can integrate into amateur radio. Now, I Googled ham radio and Arduino today. Also Googled ham radio Raspberry Pi. On and on and on and on. There are hundreds of pages talking about all the different projects that are available on either one of those hardware platforms, but there are even other hardware platforms beyond Raspberry Pi and Arduino. But those are two good places to start. ARRL has a book. And that book is written by an amateur. And Glenn Popel, I believe is how you pronounce his name. He's a KW5 GP. Now, if you didn't know this, ARRL has a lot of books, and they have a lot of good information. I strongly recommend you join the ARRL. There were times in my amateur career I didn't agree with their politics, so to speak, but I still was an ARRL member. So Glenn has a book that you can get through the ARRL called Arduino for Ham Radio. And it is an absolutely fantastic book. You can get you a Nano or one of the other Arduino boards and build kits without ever having to buy a soldering iron. But then I found some kits that you could buy, and the Arduino itself didn't require any soldering. It's already ready to go, but the off-board module did. So now you can mix the two. You can mix the smoke and solder if you want, and the pre-built kits. One other book I will mention tonight. There's at least 5 volumes. There may be more. I know I've seen 5. There may be more volumes. It's called the Official Raspberry Pi Project Book, and it's available on Amazon. And in those books, there are some kits that probably would be of interest to amateur radio operators. But there are also other articles and web pages and books that are specifically dedicated to amateur radio and Raspberry Pis. So, what's the point of my message tonight? I enjoy building kits. I really do. And but I just don't really have the time. So I find other ways to build kits using modules and boards like this. They seem to go together quicker and they work. And sometimes my soldering skills aren't all that great. So, you have to do some troubleshooting on the boards that I build, like Terry said. And I don't have all the tools right now, but maybe someday I will. So if you're out there tonight wanting to do some kit building and you don't want to invest in maybe all the tools, think about an Arduino and think about a Raspberry Pi. And here's the good news. Before COVID, Tom, AE0GQ, and I had put together an Elmer training session where for $20, a mere $20, if you showed up, we were going to, Tom was going to teach you all there was to know about Arduinos. and you were going to get to take one home with you. So that's still on the schedule for some time past COVID. But we have a lot of people in the club that are very good with Arduinos. And we have lots of people in the club that are very good with Linux and Raspberry Pis, as well as Beagle Bone Dogs or whatever that is as well. So that's all I have. We're going to go ahead now and take questions. And please feel free to ask any questions you want about kit building. If the questions are detailed and maybe in depth about Raspberry Pis or maybe Arduinos, then I'm going to, I've got some resources here tonight. I'm going to get involved. But if they're about the other side of the presentation, which was soldering kits and things of that nature, then I think Terry can field most of those. So 73 to all. Thank you for being here tonight. And we're going to throw it out there for questions. And I think, Dan, are you part of that process of getting the questions?
I am, Paul. Yeah. So certainly thanks for that. Just information, not only from you, but from Terry as well. Here on the Google Meet site, Justin has his hand up. So Justin, AE2L, we'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so my question, I guess, would be for Jeff. You know, my first experience with the Arduino was changing the way that my AE2L shack sign worked. And, you know, I wanted it to go light blue, dark blue, light blue, dark blue. I didn't want the rainbow. And what I found very frustrating, you know, I write code, that's not an issue, but I was interested in, you know, and obviously this is kit building, but it's more about testing the functionality. Is there like an emulator, or are you always in the hardware? Because what I found frustrating is I had to upload my code to the device, see what it did, and then debug. And it felt kind of old school compared to, you know, just-in-time debugging and whatnot. So I was just interested from an Arduino perspective. Was I doing something wrong? I mean, obviously I got it programmed, but and it's blue, light blue, blue, light blue. Would be interested in just tips, tricks, comments, and that might be a whole other presentation. But anyway, that was my question.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. And we'll throw it over to Jeff, since you mentioned Jeff, and then we also let Tom comment as well. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, so short answer is with these wonderful little Arduinos is you're down and dirty with the hardware, so there's not a lot of emulation. But for basic testing your code, there is a CAD tool web-based called Tinkercad. And if you go to Tinkercad, they actually have an Arduino emulator in it. So you can actually like drag pieces, resistors, and LEDs and so forth in and quickly test code there. That actually works pretty well. But, quickly while I got the floor, I just want to, preach the merits of Arduino myself. I've worked on every microcontroller platform under the sun, PICs to propellers to Beagle. I mean, just across the board. But the Arduino is my true love. I mean, that's what I cut my teeth on. And while I no longer use Arduino boards, I do a lot of custom builds. I know some of you probably saw this at Field Day last year. It was an early prototype. So this is a rocket controller, or no, an altimeter and flight controller for high power rocketry that I did for KB4 SMK. So this is, believe it or not, runs Arduino code. But it's very high power, very fast, and collects data real time. And he's actually flown it a number of times this year. I also have an infatuation with clocks, as many of you know. I love the concept of time and playing with time. So I did my own design of a clock board that uses you see the GPS antenna there. So all my clocks are GPS driven, so you never need to set the time. And while it's a completely custom circuit of my own design, it runs Arduino. And just because it's so easy to use. And when you're playing with Arduino, you're building on the shoulders of giants, because whatever you're doing, somebody's done something close, which gives you a starting point. The last one I'll show off, and if you've been on the website, you've seen this. This is my antenna analyzer. And yes, it's Arduino. And a full touchscreen display. It uses a little board from Rig Expert of cost me $80 and gives me all the same functionality that their $600 antenna analyzers do. So anyway, good stuff. And it goes without saying, if anybody's got questions about Arduinos, Raspberry Pis, or any of that kind of stuff, I've been doing electronics since I was 5. You know where to find me. I'm glad to help at any time.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that, and that's cool. I hope you didn't break that board when you dropped it. But,
No.
Okay, good. Tom, do you have any additional comments, Tom? A0GQ, are you in there?
Yeah, I'm there. I'm got to unmute for a change. You know, you forget these things. First off, I would point out, Jeff, that distilling liquor is illegal in the United States and in every state. I just thought I would mention that for you. But anyhow, Justin, he's right. Emulators are wonderful, but no, you're dealing with something that's way, way, way too simple to worry about an emulator. And you can upload code to that thing a million times. Well, not quite that many, but pretty close to it. The Arduinos are very simple to understand, and then you can become more and more complex as you move. There's all sorts of ham projects that you can get. Popeil that Paul mentioned, I think he's got rotor controllers for every brand of ham rotor that you can get from Yaesu to wherever. And they're all Arduino controlled. There's a lot of things like they're very simple to use. And I think I happen to know that N0KKY has one that helps him, I believe, park his car without running it through the back end of his garage. It's a small Arduino project that warns him how close he is. So there's lots of uses. And it's real simple to get it to blink, Paul, just to let you know.
Yeah, thanks. I'm working on that. Hey, can I put a plug in real quick before we take another question, Dan?
Sure, go ahead.
Hey, this is a fantastic week for ham radio, and we've had nets all week. And tomorrow night, on Thursday night, is our Thursday night Elmer Tech Net. And Tom, the gentleman that was just speaking, A0GQ, is doing a presentation. You don't want to miss this tomorrow night, really, seriously. Okay? It's called, the title is Don't Sweat the DBs. Don't sweat the DBs. So come out tomorrow, get your dinner early. It's going to be way before midnight if you're going to stay up late. 8 o'clock on the W0CFI repeater for the presentation on Don't Sweat the DBs. And I'm looking forward to it. Every time Tom does a presentation, we get the most comments from people. Oh, and they're good comments, Tom, by the way. So, well, that one wasn't, but don't worry about that. It's not, it was a Denver Radio Club guy, so don't worry about that. No, that's a joke. I'm not throwing them under the bus. I don't want to do that. I'll get in trouble then. I'll get a bunch of emails. Okay. So that's tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, W0CFI. Be there or be square. Okay. Additional questions?
Yes, Paul, we have one here on the Google Meet side. We'll throw it over to Cameron. Cameron, it's the floor is yours.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Everybody can hear me? Make sure my mic's working. Awesome. So with the Raspberry Pi, I just built one myself for my little FT891 to use to do digital modes on HF. If you want to build one, there's one guy I have to recommend, and his call sign is KM4ACK. He's written a script that will build your Raspberry Pi for you with very, very little input from you. Put in your call sign. If you want to do WinLink. Speaking of, I need somebody to help me figure out why I can't get it to do WinLink. I can do a telnet, but I cannot make connection with anybody else. And I haven't been able to figure it out yet. Yes, Justin, I will get you the link. But that there's lots of guys out there who are using these for ham radio. They've built an operating system like Ham Pie or something like that does it all for you. So it's super simple. If you can put the operating system onto the card, you can download a CAM4ACK script and it'll do everything else for you.
Yeah, Cameron.
That to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I was playing with a little KX3 a couple months ago, and I wanted to get it on digital. Got a Raspberry Pi, fired it all up, set up FT8 on it. Fantastic, running it as well with PSK31, and very, very easy to set up HF Digital with the Raspberry Pi. So thanks for your comments. Appreciate that. And that person you mentioned, that's KM4SMK, right?
KM4ACK. I'm getting actually ready to post a
ACK.
link to his GitHub site where he gives you the one command line you have to put into terminal and it'll run the script.
He's fantastic. He's got all kinds of really good stuff on his website, and if you want to get it up and going and get it on the air, you go there, man. It's all set up. He's got a lot of other really good stuff on his website, by the way. I'll throw that plug out for him as well. Thank you, Cameron. Appreciate it.
Yeah, the other guy would be Oscar Hotel 8 Sierra Tango November. He's an American expat living in Norway, and does a lot of stuff with Raspberry Pis and QRP digital modes.
Thank you very much. What else do we have, Dan?
Yeah, great references, Cameron, for sure. Tom has his hand up, so Tom, we'll throw it back over to you.
I'm sorry, I keep forgetting to hit the mute. That is the phrase of the year. You're on mute. Just thought I would mention that. I went out to saw Stan, and he had a lovely a ham clock that looks an awful lot like the really expensive GE clocks that are horribly expensive. And I really was impressed. So I went and got a Raspberry Pi, which is what he was using, to build one. Ended up realizing that I had bought a 4B, which is way too much Raspberry Pi for something like a ham clock. So I went and got another 3B and a GPS dongle. So my ham clock is actually GPS controlled now as far as the time goes. So I got it made, and strictly because I saw Stan's. A lot of fun.
Excellent. And, I'll tell you, Stan was setting his up, and he had a few questions. And Jeff stepped in, and a couple other people stepped in, helped him out with that. And that's where the club's really, big benefit. If you run into issues, definitely let people know, because we will jump right in and help. Well, I may not, but somebody will. That's a fact. Okay, thanks for your comments there, Tom.
Well, back on the Google Meets chat room, Paul, it looks like Scott has started to mess around with a Draws hat for a Raspberry Pi, and he added the link, which we can also post over on YouTube. So we'll put that there as well. Cameron posted KM4ACK's YouTube channel, so you can check that out as well. So good stuff there.
Excellent.
And going back over to the YouTube chat room, no questions posted there. So we'll kick it back to you, Paul.
Okay, very good. Are there any questions? And we'll still take questions about Pis and Arduinos and comments. If you want to stick up a project you're working on, feel free to do that, like Jeff did. If you want to talk a little bit about you building something with a Pi, that's great. Are there any questions on the solder and smoke side of the presentation for Terry about soldering irons, soldering wicks, wattage of soldering irons? Is there anything out there that we can fire up Terry's way?
Justin has his.
I have a question. I'm going to go both directions on this one. So right now I use a Weller WT CPT, uses fixed temperature tips. And I wanted an opinion on that versus the variable ones. That's the soldering related question. And then the other part of this was I posted a link in the Google Meets for I want to remind everyone about like the ham clock build Mike wrote up, put on the forum. And then you can see I got my ham clock back there. But what's even cooler is right now I've got the ham clock integrated with the grid tracker software. So when I'm working DX, it updates the whole ham clock to the guy I'm working on FT8, which is really cool. And then of course, let's see if I can get it on camera. I've got the expensive ham clock over there, which is pretty, but I got to say the ham clock is, I like the ham clock better. So anyway, that was my comments is don't forget the member builds and projects section of the forum.
Can you get a little closer view on the ham clock behind you, Justin?
Maybe. Hang on. It's on it's a Pi on a monitor. The Pi's like on the floor. She's also running a weather station thing. Let me see if I can zoom in. Hang on.
Stan, you won't pop up on the screen unless you unmute your mic and talk.
All right, let's see if I can show you my ham clock here.
Is that zooming in?
Yes, it is. And we're seeing Stan's as well.
Cool.
Yeah, that's good. There we go, Stan.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. But when I work, the grid tracker software forwards all the UDP who I'm working over to the ham clock. So last station I work, anybody, it shows my DX contacts, and then it'll show me the azimuth and it helps me point the hex beam in the right direction. Fun little project.
Justin, in the chat room, it says you need a bigger shack.
Yeah, probably do.
Yeah. But you have a nice shack.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's only 30 feet by 14 feet. So I'll have to work on that. Not really. So.
We could have field day there.
We could have field day at my house if we could have field day at Stan's house too.
Well, I'm glad you said something about that, Justin, because we are going to have field day out of Stan's ranch, January the 30th. You're all welcome to come out to N0KKY's ranch, and there's going to be a group of amateurs that are not really sponsored by anybody, but we're going to get together out there and work winter field day. You have plenty of open area to set up your bring your trailers, your RVs, set up antennas. There'll be a fantastic barn you can come in to warm up and have some lunch. Bring whatever you want to eat. We're going to have a grill there, and but bring your own food this year, and it's going to be absolutely fantastic. Now, Stan told me this in confidence, but I'm going to go ahead and it's not my fault if this doesn't happen. It's Stan's fault. But Stan said it was going to be 60 degrees on January 30th. Is that right, Stan? Is that what you told me?
Yeah, I think I said that, Paul.
Okay, I thought so. And
yeah.
I 73'd you on it.
That's part of the guarantee,
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So, I mean, you can be sure of several things. It's going to be a nice day no matter what. I'm going to bring quarter-pound hot dogs, right? And we're going to have a great time. So, a little plug for that, January the 30th, N0KKY's ranch. And there'll be something in the blast this Sunday, the next Sunday, and the following Sunday. So, check it out.
Yeah, every vehicle will have its COVID spacing of 2,500 square feet. So,
absolutely. We are following all COVID rules. And if you want to come in the barn and you want to wear a mask, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine too. We'll have plenty of spacing. And boy, I could go on for an hour about last year because it was just it was fantastic. I can't even probably the best amateur radio event that I've ever attended was Winter Field Day last year. Dan, I don't know what you think about that, but
Oh, I would agree. It was just an absolute blast. I mean, number one, just the setting alone is something special. But number two, to see everybody and their portable setup and different techniques and ideas and antennas and equipment, just an absolute showcase for the amateur radio service. It was really good. Randy actually has his hand up, K0TNV. So Randy, we'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I just had one quick comment about soldering. For anybody that's watching, I mean, don't be afraid of soldering. It's really not that hard, and you got to burn your fingers a couple times anyway. So, but it really isn't difficult, and it's a good skill to have. And I mean, I've been doing it since I was 12, and the only bad thing is dropping solder on your leg. You know, if you're working over your lap, don't do that. It's also a good idea not to barbecue naked, but that's another story. All right. That's all I got. My camera's not working. Sorry.
No, you're there. You're looking good.
Yeah, you're looking good. And we're not going to comment on the last comment. We're not going to elaborate on that.
Yeah, he broke up coming into the machine on that.
What happens at Winterfield Day stays at Winterfield Day there, Randy.
But I'm gonna cook
right.
my hot dogs before you go grill.
Well, going back, we'll throw it over to Jeff. Jeff has his hand up. So Jeff, the floor is yours.
Just to answer Justin's question on soldering and temperature, yes. I mean, especially if you're working with smaller surface mount stuff, being able to control your temperature is pretty important. And as Brad, A4BA's presentation is over on the forums, and I think there was a couple of us that added follow-on to his great work. And I know I posted a post with a lot of links to the materials that I use, including my soldering station, which is a Chinese version, a Chinese brand that's been great for me. I think I paid $60 for it. I will preach the merits of auto-ranging multimeters. The multimeter I had from when I was 14 finally died back earlier this year, and so I treated myself to a Unity UT61E. It was I think $90 on Amazon. Crazy accurate. It's the most accurate meter I've ever had. And one last thing on soldering: don't forget your flux. You can get these liquid flux pins from Amazon. They're fantastic. But sometimes you got to get hardcore with the really nasty, sticky stuff, especially if you're reworking like antique radio stuff. This will bust open the old solder, and it's amazing. And again, so just keep in mind if when you're doing soldering and flux go hand in hand.
And I'll second what Jeff just said, Justin. I mean, if you're just going to get one iron, one of the adjustable temperature ones is definitely the way to go. Since I have the old Weller stuff that still works, that's why I have two. For little teeny surface mount devices or really little boards, I'll use that 12-watt pencil, and the 35-watt iron works for most everything from the old tube-type rigs that I fix from time to time, as well as building any of these kits. And the gun's only around for soldering antenna wires outside. And again, with the flux, if you do use any of the old style rosin, which is really tree sap, it's really corrosive, and it's a good idea to clean that stuff up after you do a solder repair with it. You can use alcohol, or they do sell special flux remover, and I'd have to look at the brand that I had. It works better, but almost everybody has the alcohol, or you can run over to Walgreens or CVS and get it. But clean that brown flux off when you're done, and your radio or your repair will thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the updates. I had this soldering iron from when I used to do remote control cars, and it was battery wires and soldering motor wires, and it was great for that. But I've got a Morcerino kit here that's a little scary. It wasn't quite as scary as the bandpass filter for the Whisper Light with the toroid winding, but yeah, sometimes I think I've got the wrong temperature, so I'll look at those links on the forum. So thank you.
Yeah, and I've seen the variable irons go from $49 clear, way up to well over $200 easily. But I think a good average number to buy one of those is the $60 to $112 range, probably. And you can get the major brands, or you can get the Chinese knockoffs, which seem to work real well for most people. Anything else, Dan?
As of right now, Paul, I'm not seeing any hands up on the Google Meet side. Let me check over here on the YouTube side. A good comment by Robert. Best soldering tutorial I've seen was Paul's. Paul Carlson's on Mr. Carlson's Lab YouTube channel. So there's another reference for people to check out. Is Mr. Carlson's Lab on YouTube. So good stuff there. There's another plug thrown out there. No other comments other than the expectation of a 60-degree January winter field day. So, Stan, we're looking forward to you delivering on that expectation.
Yeah, I'll do my best.
But either way, come out. It's going to be.
But
fantastic.
either way, they'll be out. There'll be heaters and there'll be places to get warm.
Yeah, it'll be good.
It's
It'll be
ugly.
good. And a couple things on that. If there's no more questions, I'll just make a couple quick comments about field day. Brad had the biggest antenna last year, and you don't have to just bring small portable antennas. In terms of QRP type antennas, you can bring larger antennas and put them up on a mast and put a rotator on them. Whatever you want, whatever you dream up, you can bring out. You can bring 100-watt radios, you can bring amps, or you can bring 5-watt radios. Anything and everything is fine. So anyway, and then the other comment about field day, we're talking about winter field day now, which is not an ARRL sponsored event, I don't believe, but a group of people that do this every year. But the Parker Radio Association is participating in the annual ARRL field day, June the 26th and 27th. And we're going to be up at the Colorado campground. That's the name of the campground up out by Woodland Park. And you can come up for the day. You can come up to camp or whatever you want to do. But if you are going to come up to camp, just take a look at recreation.gov and go ahead and secure a site. We will have limited tent camping sites available for you on the scale of maybe 15 or so sites. So if you're going to come up with a tent and you don't want to reserve a site, we'll have a place for you. But if you're bringing up an RV, trailer, motorhome, whatever the case is, you need to really go to that site as soon as possible tonight and grab you a site, get a site reserved. We will be operating around the sites 46, 47, and 48. But the whole campsite is fairly small. I'm actually kind of around the corner. It's a little quieter there. But get whatever site you want and get it. And you can cancel the site, by the way. So if you book the site now, something comes up, big reunion, whatever the case is, you'll still want to cancel the reunion and come to field day. But in case you don't want to do that, you can cancel your site, I think up to 7 days ahead of time with a full refund. So get those sites booked now. They are filling up fast. Half the campground is already booked. So just a quick
and to add to that, Paul, if somebody is going to cancel their, if they have a reservation and they're going to cancel it, speak with everybody in the club first. There might be someone that will be more than happy to take it off your hands.
Absolutely. We have our turnout is usually 30 to 40 campers and maybe 50 for our meal Saturday night. And why wouldn't you come up for the meal? You're, pork shoulder, right? And it's fantastic. Cooked in the
Smoked
Traeger.
meat and BX, you can't beat it.
You can't beat it at all. You can't beat it at all. And I'm going to guarantee good weather.
And I'll guarantee propagation. So we got it all.
Yeah.
I want to ask you guys for some lottery numbers while we're talking about these things.
74.
73.
73 for ID. 74. Okay.
Well, Dan, I think it's about time to wrap this up tonight. If we don't have any other questions, I'm I don't think there's anything else out there. So
No, not seeing anything on either side, Paul. So it looks like most of the questions have certainly been answered. So great job.
Great. Well, I want to thank Terry for his presentation. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I really, really, really look forward to the time we can actually have a Elmer Night again at the library. Somebody made a comment today, Dan, that was kind of interesting. It was like, the way we're growing, we may have to move over to the Pace Center.
Whoa. Whoa.
So
now we're talking.
Now we're talking. But anyway, we look forward to seeing everybody here in person, meeting all the new amateurs. And Dan, you had one other thing?
Yeah, we got one more hand up, so we'll throw it over to Doug.
Let's take it. Doug, go ahead.
Well, last year, Patriot VE team was up at Field Day, and once we get a little closer, I'll let you know if that happens again this year.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we had a bunch of upgrades and tests taken up there. That was a great benefit for those that went to Field Day last year. Good call there, Doug.
I don't know any other organization that could pull that off, and I don't know of any other testing site that's ever happened that way up in the mountains with the trees and the food and all the DX and everything we were doing. That was just fantastic. So I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. We will have, as usual, our 3 nets next week. Monday night is our digital net. Tuesday night is our analog net on W0CFI. And Thursday night will be our Elmer Tech Net. And please don't forget tomorrow night for our Elmer Tech Net special edition. And Tom is going to be there. And the title is Don't Sweat the DBs. So 73 to all. And have a good evening and a happy new year. Good night.
And we are off of YouTube.